Nestled in a quiet enclave of Beverly Hills, Eva Gabor's former residence is an elegant testament to Hollywood's golden age. A grand staircase curves gracefully in the foyer, leading to rooms adorned with crystal chandeliers and French-inspired furnishings that evoke the glamour of its one-time occupant. But in the years following her death in 1995, whispers of strange occurrences have turned this beautiful home into a hub of eerie intrigue. The first incident was reported by an interior designer hired to renovate the home. While working late one evening, he claimed he felt a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air, followed by the unmistakable scent of Chanel No. 5, the perfume Eva was known to wear. The fragrance seemed to drift through the room, lingering as if someone invisible had passed by. Shaken but dismissive, he chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Months later, the new owners hosted a dinner party. Guests marveled at the house's opulence, but as the night wore on, the mood shifted. One guest, a longtime fan of Eva's, excused herself to freshen up. She later recounted that while she was in the upstairs bathroom, she heard soft, melodic laughter echoing down the hallway. Thinking it was another guest, she stepped out, only to find the corridor empty. It was as if the house was alive, she said, her voice trembling. Stories spread quickly, drawing the curious and the skeptical alike. A real estate agent who toured the property remarked on the subtle smell of roses, a signature touch of Eva's style, though no floral arrangements were present. Another visitor described hearing the faint clinking of champagne glasses in the dining room, only to find it empty upon investigation. The most unnerving account came from a caretaker who lived on the property for a brief period. He described waking in the middle of the night to the sound of a soft, lilting voice singing in Hungarian. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and though he didn't understand the words, he felt an overwhelming sadness. When he turned on the lights, the house was silent again. While skeptics argue that these experiences are nothing more than the power of suggestion, those who have stepped foot in Eva Gabor's former home tell a different story. "It's not frightening," said one guest. "It's as though she's still here, watching over the place she loved. There's a warmth to it, even in the eeriness." Today, the house remains a sought-after property, though prospective buyers are often forewarned of its ghostly reputation. Whether it's the faint scent of Chanel No. 5 or the echoes of a glamorous laugh, Eva's presence lingers, a spectral reminder of a bygone era. Those who visit are left with a peculiar sense that perhaps, in some ethereal way, the Hollywood icon never truly left. One balmy summer evening, a film historian named Claire Johnson visited the house as part of her research into the lives of Hollywood legends. Claire had been granted special permission to spend the night, as the current owners were curious themselves and hoped she might shed light on the home's peculiar energy. Arriving just before sunset, Claire walked through the gilded rooms, marveling at the meticulous preservation of Eva's taste. It felt less like stepping into a house and more like stepping into the past. A lingering warmth seemed to emanate from the walls, and that distinct rose and vanilla scent hung in the air. She chalked it up to a lingering fragrance embedded in the house's history, or so she tried to convince herself. As darkness fell, Claire settled in the drawing room with her notebook. She was scribbling observations when she heard it, a soft hum, almost imperceptible at first, but gradually growing louder. The melody was unmistakably Hungarian, haunting and melancholic. Claire froze, her pen poised mid-air. The sound seemed to drift down from the second floor. Gripping a flashlight, she ascended the grand staircase. The hum morphed into words, sung so delicately they seemed to float on the air. Claire, fluent in multiple languages but not Hungarian, recorded the tune on her phone, her hand trembling as she climbed. The sound drew her toward the master bedroom, the room once belonging to Eva. The door creaked open on its own as she approached, revealing a space untouched by time. A mirrored vanity gleamed in the moonlight filtering through the window. The faint scent of Chanel No. 5 was stronger here, almost tangible. And then the humming stopped. Claire stepped into the room, her reflection fractured into 100 facets on the mirrored vanity. On its surface, the dust had been disturbed not by a hand, but as though something had been dragged across it. She leaned closer, her breath catching as she deciphered the faint words traced in the thin layer of dust. Saratlek. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the spell. Startled, she fumbled to answer, only to find there was no call. The screen displayed an old black-and-white photograph of Eva Gabor she didn't recall saving. It was captioned simply, "You found me." Before Claire could react, the bedroom door slammed shut behind her. Claire's heart pounded as the sound of the door echoed through the silent house. She spun around, the beam of her flashlight flickering wildly across the room. The air seemed thicker now, heavy with an unplaceable tension. The soft hum returned, this time closer, as if the source was just behind her. Gathering her courage, Claire turned toward the mirrored vanity. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving an almost deafening silence in its wake. In the reflection, she could see the room behind her clearly and something else. A faint, shimmering figure was seated on the edge of the bed, barely more than a suggestion of light and shadow, yet unmistakably feminine. The figure's hair was styled in waves reminiscent of 1950s glamour, and though its face was indistinct, Claire could sense it watching her. She didn't dare move, her eyes fixed on the reflection. Slowly, the figure lifted an arm and pointed toward the wardrobe, an ornate piece of furniture that Claire had noticed earlier but dismissed as a relic of the past. The wardrobe's double doors were slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of dark, empty space within. The figure vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the room unnervingly still. Claire hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. Compelled by a force she couldn't name, she crossed the room to the wardrobe. As her fingers brushed the cool brass handle, a low creak emanated from inside, as if something or someone shifted within. With a deep breath, she pulled the doors open. Inside, the wardrobe was filled with clothing far too pristine to be decades old. Dresses, furs, and shoes were arranged as though Eva herself had stepped away only moments before. But what truly caught Claire's attention was a small leather-bound journal sitting on the wardrobe floor, its cover embossed with the initials E.G. She knelt to pick it up, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat and elegant, a mixture of English and Hungarian. At first, the entries seemed mundane notes about parties, lines for roles, but as she reached the later pages, the tone shifted. Eva had written about unsettling dreams, about feeling watched even in her own home. The final entry, dated weeks before her death, was scrawled in a frantic hand. "I hear her voice at night. She calls my name. I cannot escape her." Claire barely had time to process the words before the wardrobe doors slammed shut with a violent force. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the room plunged into darkness as the flashlight slipped from her hand. The hum returned, louder now, surrounding her from all sides. It was no longer melodic. It was insistent, almost angry. Somewhere in the house, the faint laughter began again, cascading like a ripple of water. This time, it wasn't soft or distant, it was near, and it wasn't alone. Other voices joined in, blending into a cacophony of mirthless mirth. Claire scrambled for her flashlight, her mind racing. Whatever was in the house with her wasn't content with merely watching anymore. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The laughter ebbed, replaced by a deafening silence so complete that Claire could hear her own shallow breaths and the frantic thud of her heart. She pressed her back against the wardrobe, clutching the journal tightly. Its leather cover felt warmer than it should have, as if the book itself were alive. Suddenly, the chandelier above her began to sway, its crystals casting fragmented light across the room. The movement was slow at first, but then it jerked violently, sending eerie patterns skittering along the walls. Claire's gaze darted toward the vanity. In the fractured reflections, she saw the room multiply, each shard revealing something different. Her own wide-eyed terror, the shimmering figure seated once again on the bed, and most horrifying of all countless shadowy forms lining the walls, standing just beyond the edge of her vision. A soft voice broke the silence, low and melodic, but now tinged with something cold and foreign. "You shouldn't have come." Claire spun, her voice catching in her throat. The words hadn't come from behind her, they seemed to seep from the walls themselves. She clutched the journal tighter, her instincts screaming that it was the key to whatever was happening. For the briefest moment, the scent of Chanel No. 5 was overwhelming, suffocating, before it vanished entirely. The wardrobe doors creaked open once more, though Claire hadn't touched them. The darkness within seemed deeper now, almost alive, and a faint, golden light glimmered at its center. Without fully understanding why, she felt drawn toward it. Her trembling hand extended toward the light, but just before her fingers touched it, a cold, unseen force yanked her backward. Claire hit the floor hard, the journal flying from her grasp. The laughter returned, loud and dissonant, overlapping in a way that set her teeth on edge. She scrambled to her feet, searching frantically for the journal. It was gone, as if the house itself had swallowed it. The golden light began to grow, spilling out of the wardrobe and pooling onto the floor like liquid fire. Shapes began to form in the light dresses, for stoles, sparkling jewels all eerily reminiscent of Eva's iconic wardrobe. They floated, twisting and writhing, as though animated by some unseen force. Claire stumbled backward, her mind racing. From the glowing mass, a hand emerged. Slender, adorned with rings, it was undeniably Eva's, her elegance unmistakable even in this spectral form. The hand reached toward Claire, not with menace but with purpose. And though she felt the icy grip of terror constrict her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that Eva was trying to tell her something. "Help me," the voice whispered again, softer this time, almost pleading. But before Claire could respond, the wardrobe slammed shut. The golden light snuffed out in an instant. The room was dark again, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the window. Claire was left alone, trembling, the scent of roses still lingering faintly in the air. And then, just as she thought it was over, a sharp knock echoed from the front door downstairs. 3 deliberate knocks. Someone or something was waiting for her. Claire froze, every nerve in her body screaming to ignore the sound. But the knocks came again, louder this time, reverberating through the house like the tolling of a bell. 3 sharp, deliberate strikes that seemed to demand her attention. She glanced toward the bedroom door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. Didn't. The silence that followed the knocking was oppressive, almost alive. Gripping the banister tightly, she descended the grand staircase, her footsteps hesitant. The house felt different now. The once welcoming opulence was replaced by a suffocating weight, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Shadows danced across the ornate wallpaper, shifting in ways that defied logic. Claire swore she heard faint whispers, fragmented words spoken in hushed, hurried tones, just beyond the edge of comprehension. When she reached the foyer, she stopped, staring at the front door. The brass handle gleamed faintly, and the shadows cast by the chandelier above seemed to twist unnaturally toward it, like dark tendrils urging her forward. Her fingers hovered over the handle as a voice soft and unmistakably Eva's whispered from behind her. "Don't open it." Claire spun around, her breath caught in her throat. The room behind her was empty, yet the air felt charged, as if someone stood inches away, just out of sight. The scent of Chanel No. 5 returned, stronger than ever, enveloping her in a cloud of familiarity and fear. The knocking came again, this time from somewhere else. It wasn't the front door anymore, it was coming from deeper within the house. The sound was muffled, as though it echoed through layers of walls. Claire's pulse quickened as the realization hit her. The sound was coming from the mirrored vanity upstairs. Panicked but compelled, she backed away from the front door and made her way up the stairs again. Each step felt heavier, as though the house itself was trying to hold her back. By the time she reached the bedroom, the knocking had stopped. The vanity sat in the corner, its surface eerily clean despite the earlier dust. Her eyes were drawn to the mirror, where words had appeared, traced in a delicate, looping script. They weren't scrawled like before this time. They were deliberate, almost graceful. "Find the key." Before Claire could react, the lights in the house flickered and went out entirely. Plunged into darkness, She fumbled for her phone, its weak flashlight casting a dim glow. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, but something was wrong. The figure wasn't mimicking her movements. It stood perfectly still, watching her with wide, vacant eyes. Claire stumbled backward, her phone slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. In the silence that followed, she heard it again, the laughter, soft and cruel, wrapping around her like a noose. The mirror began to vibrate, faintly at first, then with increasing intensity, as though something on the other side was trying to break through. And then it cracked. A single jagged line split the glass from top to bottom, and from the crack seeped a thin, dark mist that coiled and writhed like living smoke. Claire's instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She was rooted to the spot as the mist began to take shape, forming someone standing in front of the shattered mirror. It wasn't Eva. The figure was taller, its presence colder, darker, and more oppressive. It wore no face, only a blank void where features should have been, but it radiated a sense of malice so strong it made Claire's chest tighten. "You shouldn't have come," it said in a voice that echoed with a chorus of whispers, each more chilling than the last. The crack in the mirror widened, and the mist began to pour out faster now, filling the room. Claire's vision blurred, and the world around her seemed to tilt. The last thing she saw before the darkness overtook her was the figure reaching out, its hand impossibly long and clawed, grasping for her throat. When Claire awoke, she was no longer in the bedroom. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of roses mixed with something metallic. She blinked, her vision adjusting to the dim light, and realized she was in the grand foyer again, lying on the cold marble floor. Above her, the chandelier was still swaying, its crystals emitting faint, fractured light. The house was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that thrummed with unseen tension, a silence that watched and waited. Claire sat up slowly, her head pounding. The journal was in her lap again, though she had no memory of picking it up. The cracked mirror, the mist, the faceless figure, had it all been a nightmare? She desperately wanted to believe it, but the bruises on her wrist, shaped like elongated fingers, told a different story. The words from the mirror echoed in her mind. "Find the key." Claire flipped through the journal again, her hands trembling. Near the back, tucked into the seam of the binding, she found a small, folded piece of paper. On it was a crude map of the house, marked with an X in the basement. The basement. She didn't even know the house had one. A door at the end of the hallway creaked open as if on cue, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Claire hesitated, every rational part of her screaming to leave. But she couldn't. Something compelled her forward, the same force that had drawn her to the house in the first place. Gripping her phone like a lifeline, she descended the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder the deeper she went, and the scent of roses gave way to damp earth and mildew. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with old, forgotten trinkets, porcelain figurines, tarnished silverware, and faded photographs. In the center of the room stood a single item, a large, antique trunk. Its surface was covered in scratches, as if someone or something had tried to claw it open. A heavy brass lock secured it, its keyhole intricately carved. Claire knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she examined the lock. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the journal again, flipping to the page with the map. Something shifted behind her. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The soft, familiar hum returned, but it wasn't alone. This time, it was layered with whispers, too faint to understand but unmistakably hostile. Slowly, Claire turned, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The mist was back, seeping into the room through the cracks in the walls and pooling around her feet. Out of it emerged the shimmering figure she had seen before, but it wasn't Eva this time. It was a grotesque, twisted version of her, its features distorted, its once beautiful face stretched into an expression of anguish and rage. "You shouldn't have come," it hissed, the voice no longer Eva's but a cacophony of others, as though a dozen spirits spoke through it. Claire scrambled backward, her hand brushing against the trunk. She felt something cold and metallic beneath her fingers, a key. Without thinking, she jammed it into the lock and twisted. The trunk popped open with a loud click, and a brilliant golden light spilled out, brighter than anything she had seen before. It filled the room, driving back the mist and the figure, which screamed in fury as it dissolved into the light. Inside the trunk was a single object, a hand mirror, its frame ornate and gold, encrusted with jewels. Claire hesitated, then picked it up. As she did, the light dimmed, and the room fell silent. She turned the mirror over, gazing into its surface. Instead of her reflection, she saw Eva's face, serene and smiling. "Thank you," Eva's voice whispered, soft and clear. The scent of Chanel No. 5 enveloped Claire one last time, warm and comforting. Then the mirror's surface turned black, and the image disappeared. The mist was gone. The house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Claire climbed back up the stairs, the mirror clutched tightly in her hands. As she reached the foyer, the first rays of dawn were streaming through the windows, painting the walls in soft gold. She placed the mirror on the vanity and turned to leave, but as she reached the front door, she stopped. The faintest sound of laughter, light, musical, and unmistakably Eva's, followed her. The house was quiet now, but Claire knew it wasn't empty. Some part of Eva Gabor would always remain, her essence woven into the very fabric of the place she had loved so dearly. And though the haunting was over, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't done with its secrets or with her. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.